The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. I'm Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Baseball analytics has become a popular topic of conversation in Philadelphia since the Phillies hired Matt Klentak as general manager in 2015, and more recently, Gabe Kapler as manager. Both Klentak and Kapler represent the new wave of analytics-based evaluation. For those unfamiliar with analytics, it's a pretty dramatic shift away from the traditional evaluative measures of batting average, RBI, and home runs to more obscure metrics like on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS, which is on-base plus slugging percentage. In the 1990s, general managers began adopting these new metrics to determine player salaries and which free agents to pursue. More recently, clubs have hired managers who are conversant in the metrics and who determine their lineups and pitching rotations based upon them. To give us a better understanding of baseball analytics is this evening's guest, Rob Dougherty, Vice President of Information Technology and Finance for Baseball Info Solutions, a professional analytics service that provides 25 MLB teams, along with broadcasters, fantasy companies, and sports agents, accurate, in-depth baseball data and cutting-edge research and analysis. Dougherty holds a politics pre-law degree from DeSales University and did his graduate work at Temple University in business administration and journalism. His company has created many innovative web and feed-based products, including synthetic StatCast and StatCast audits, defensive run save, and groundbreaking research on defensive shifts. They also published the Fielding Bible and the annual Bill James Handbook. Welcome to the program, Rob.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, you got quite a bit on your plate there. I mean, you are really at the cutting edge of analytics. And, we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but I'm a novice in this area and am eager to learn more about it. And I guess the obvious question is, why did Major League Baseball decide to change from the traditional evaluative measures of batting average, home runs, RBIs, wins, losses, and ERA?
Well, the traditional box score metrics are typically credited to Henry Chadwick, back in the mid-19th century. And although those metrics have withstood the test of time, the insight that's derived from them has progressively become less useful as innovative owners such as Branch Rickey, managers such as Earl Weaver, they've further refined how they want to look at playing the game. So I would consider it more of a competitive evolution in regard to the haves and the have-nots. For instance, in the advent of the free agency era, small market teams, such as the Oakland Athletics, had to come up with different metrics to evaluate undervalued talent to offset their inability to outbid these deeper pocket franchises, such as the Boston Red Sox. Where it got really interesting was once the larger budget teams began to embrace sabermetrics at the same level. Baseball teams they're very competitive. They're very secretive. In fact, I can't even tell you which 25 teams are our clients due to confidentiality agreements, yet alone, what products and services they buy. I can say that they each have their own unique way of analyzing data to determine value in baseball players.
Mm-hmm. So basically, what the new metrics do is add context to a player's value as a hitter, a run producer, and in the case of pitchers, their value is an innings eater and run stopper. But how, for example, does a metric like WHIP or walks and hits per inning pitched allow a manager to determine when to pull his starting pitcher?
Well, I wouldn't feel that WHIP within the specific context of an individual game has as much bearing in the decision of when to pull a starter as the efficiency of each at-bat would sway that manager. Viewed from a pitch command perspective, specifically, is he throwing it where the catcher's glove is positioned? I would place far more value on fatigue affected by pitch count, weather, rest, etc., along with upcoming opponent batter metrics versus the pitcher. And then overlay that with the leverage index of the situation and the availability within the bullpen as far as, who's rested and, who's been overworked at that point.
Mm-hmm. Though analytics has shown that a lot of those decisions are almost standard because the third time through the order, what analytics have shown is that slugging averages increase. So, for example, when Aaron Nola was pitching the opening game for the Phillies this season, Gabe Kapler pulled him, I guess it was in the fifth inning after he had only thrown, 60-some pitches. And he went to the bullpen, and he got criticized because he went through that bullpen and then didn't have a sufficient number of relievers in the next game when they got beaten. So, one of the concerns about this is that if that is true, that the third time through the order, the slugging averages go up, and hence the starting pitcher is not going to be as effective, and he probably should be pulled. Is there going to be some tension there? I mean, with traditional baseball, an analysis that says basically let that guy go until he starts getting hit.
I think you're going to have some tension there, but overall you need to adhere to the system, and then you have success from that. Not all pitchers, have that much of a deviation, third time through the rotation, but, many of them do. That's also why you see the rise and the change of the defined bullpen structure in a lot of organizations with, not just your best guy coming in the ninth inning, pretty much the seventh, eighth, and ninth or whatever, depending on the scenarios and the leverage at that point. Essentially your goal is pretty much just to get, your starter into the sixth, seventh inning, and then let the rest of the specialty role players take on, their responsibility within the organization there and, keep that game, in the win column.
Mm-hmm. Now, Rob, as a baseball historian, I'm particularly interested in a metric like WAR, or wins above replacement, because that will, I think, in the future determine if there's someone on the fence for entry into the Hall of Fame. A stat like that will determine whether they get in or not. Now, first, can you define what that term really measures and tell us how it offers a better context to a player's value?
Well, what's interesting is that, wins above replacement, which is, what WAR stands for, it's surprisingly debatable as a metric. In fact, I work with 3 different versions of WAR and its components on a daily basis. Fangraphs has one formulaic equation, Baseball Reference has another, and here at BIS we also have one. And the formulaic equations, they differ in each version, but they all attempt to achieve the same thing. The bottom line of WAR is, you want to sum up a player's total contribution to his team by determining, how many additional wins does his presence actually result versus a baseline replacement player. But it's not recognized as an official stat. Largely because there's no agreement on exactly which formula to use to actually apply that in the record books. Where this also gets interesting is that Bill James, who's one of our owners, he has concerns with this stat. And what's interesting is he published an article last November, I believe on the 17th, after the AL MVP votes came in. And he focused upon, the top 2 AL MVP vote getters, Aaron Judge and Jose Altuve. And Bill argued that Jose Altuve was much more valuable than Aaron Judge during the 2017 season.
Wow.
Because his performance in higher leverage moments, such as runners on base, close games, those variables, were far superior than that of the Giants, the giant Yankee right fielder. Bill basically conveyed and reasoned why some people think that Judge was more valuable and surmised the WAR metric. Judge had a Baseball Reference WAR value of 8.3, and Altuve had 8.1. Both great numbers.
Right.
But essentially, Bill thinks that if teams really underperform their expected win total, then the difference between the expected and the actual can't be explained by just luck. And according to Bill, the fact that Judge really underperformed in critical situations was a big reason for the Yankees' 12-game difference between expected win total last year and their actual win total. And that this negative performance is not properly captured by the current utilization of the WAR metric.
Mm-hmm.
Bill's exact.
And if you look at the traditional stats, everyone would say Judge had a better year, right?
Absolutely, yes. And that's where really looking at the defensive side of things and the various intangibles, again, such as, in the close games, in the clutch, surprising differential between those two players. In fact, with Bill's exact words, when you look at Aaron Judge's situational data, it quickly becomes apparent that Judge is not only proportionally responsible for the Yankees' poor performance in close games, but that he's more than proportionally responsible. He is disproportionately responsible for the Yankees' poor performance.
Wow.
While Judge's situational stats vary from poor to terrible, Altuve's vary from solid to sensational.
Wow. So tell me then, what would be the metrics that you as a baseball analyst, dare I say sabermetrician, would look at? Which metrics do you find most useful in judging a player's value?
I'll tell you, like for pitchers, I love leverage index.
What is
leverage
that?
Index, and the essence of it is, and there's different variables as far as leverage of when a player enters a game versus when he leaves a game. But the essence of leverage index is what sort of pressure cooker environment is going on in this particular case. The higher that number, the more difficult the situation. And that is, it has a key value, even when it comes to arbitration. For looking at the value of relievers who don't get saves, but pitch in high leverage situations. And that it's almost like the clutch of pitching. And being able to look at, how a pitcher handles high leverage situations has, I think, a large bearing on overall their level of reliability, and even a matter as far as like how comfortable you are if they're a starter, leaving them in the fifth or sixth or seventh inning if they get themselves in a bit of a bind.
And what about for a batter? What metric do you find most useful?
OPS is my favorite.
Right.
It's my tried and true favorite. It's nice and simple, it's straightforward. But overall for the batter, and slash fielder, I really like overall defensive runs saved, which we can talk about in more detail a little later. But I would say it's a really tough question. I really like the batting average with balls in play. It's a pretty straightforward formula. I mean, you just take your hits and you remove the home runs because it's not going in play if it's going over the fence, and then you're dividing that by your at bats and then removing any strikeouts, any home runs again, and then adding sacrifice flies. It's good because it basically shows you the frequency of when a player, gets a hit when he puts this ball into play. And it's very telling, and not only is it just it's defense, it's luck, and it's the talent level. For batters, it takes a while, and for pitchers as far as getting the value to really stabilize. You have to put about 800 balls in play if you're a batter. If you're a pitcher, you have to have about 2,000 balls put into play before the values really hit. Most hitters, most pitchers, they're right around 300. Your best hitters are in the 350 range, and your worst hitters are in the 260 range. Pitchers have a much shorter variance, 290 to 310. And the smaller sample size, the more variance you're going to have, unfortunately, especially on the pitcher side. And pitchers have no control pretty much over what happens when that ball is put into play. So on the pitcher side, doesn't really mean as much to me, but on the hitter side, I really like that statistic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now let's take this on to my turf, more comfortable ground, Rob. The history. Let's take a look at the history behind the analytics movement, and you're going to have to indulge me here for a little while because I know some of our listeners are not very familiar with sabermetrics, let alone the history itself. The movement's credited to Bill James and sabermetrics. As you've mentioned, Bill James is an associate member of your staff. He's also the senior baseball operations advisor for the Boston Red Sox. As I understand it, in 1975, James, who was then a night security guard at the Stokely Van Camp pork and beans plant, began writing about alternative ways to measure a player's offensive value to his team. And 2 years later, he compiled and self-published an annual book titled The Bill James Baseball Abstract. By 1982, sales had increased tenfold as James's progressive baseball analysis had earned him the respect of the Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR. Thus, James's statistical innovations became known as sabermetrics. Billy Beane, the general manager of the Oakland A's, began to apply sabermetrics to his low-budget teams in the early 2000s. And Beane was especially intrigued, as I think we both are, with the on-base percentage and OPS metrics. Those are statistics that were largely overlooked by traditional scouts and front office decision makers. And by the way, Beane told me that the way he got to thinking about those particular metrics and how he could apply them was sitting in Veterans Stadium in 1993 and watching the Philadelphia Phillies play the Toronto Blue Jays in the World Series and looking at the Phillies roster, which was a paltry band of gypsies, thieves, and journeyman ball players, and saying, gee, what makes them so successful? And he came to the conclusion that it was, on base percentage and OPS. So Beane was using these metrics to find lesser-known players who could replace the big stars, the power hitters like Jason Giambi, Miguel Tejada, Johnny Damon, who were lost to free agency, and using players who excelled at metrics like OPS and on base. Beane, with one of the lowest payrolls in MLB, crafted a team that reached the playoffs in 4 consecutive years from 2000 to 2003. The A's success caught the attention of Michael Lewis, who wrote about the phenomenon in Moneyball, a book that is often credited with popularizing sabermetrics among other MLB front offices. And of course, Brad Pitt starred as Beane in the movie and made this almost a kind of cult thing, I guess. Is that an accurate overview of how this came into being, to your understanding?
I definitely believe so. And I'm also a proud owner of an autographed first edition Moneyball from Michael Lewis.
Wow.
I've been, on that general train since he first released that book, and have enjoyed watching the embracing of the concepts over time. The movie made a big difference. But you can't. You just cannot talk about sabermetrics, to circle back, without mentioning Bill James. He's one of the more amazing minds you're going to encounter. And he defined this field as the search for objective knowledge about baseball. And he's dedicated an immense portion of his life to it. He's quite something to sit down and spend time with. The way that he looks at problems and solves them, is, pardon the cliche, is so out of the box, that this whole, overall movement, circles back to some of his, very unique, unconventional concepts, that he published in his abstract. He's still writing, still putting stuff out, new concepts, all the time. In fact, the annual Bill James Handbook that we produce here, it's the only third-party publication that's actually allowed to be used on both sides of the table, during salary arbitration hearings each off-season. And it's a telling tale there where it's, something that both, team ownership and, player agents and the Players Association, can look at that and say, that the concepts, these statistics, they have value in debating ultimately what the, financial payments would be for services of professional ball players. But beyond Bill, you can't forget about, say, like Dick Kramer, John Dewan. Dick is actually the creator of OPS. Prior to him, kind of putting that together, no one ever really thought about just taking, slugging percentage and on-base percentage, combining them and looking at it that way, and then, interpreting, what does that mean to a player in the lineup. As I mentioned earlier, it's still one of my favorite stats. And, John Dewan, he's the owner of BIS. He created defensive runs saved. And, he's been at the forefront of defensive positioning and, advising organizations, to shift their players. It's made such a difference. In fact, we have it's a large poster board that hangs in the hallway of our office, and it's essentially attributing from the San Francisco Giants, one of their World Series victories, where they had, positioned their outfielder in such a way, late in the game that they had been able to, basically make, a World Series saving catch and clinch the World Series, and they directly attribute that to having, good advice on where to put their fielders into the proper positions. And, sometimes that's the unknown, maneuvers that sabermetricians have in the industry. You see the byproduct on the field, but you don't necessarily know, like, how they went about coming up with some of the, underlying research and metrics to make some of those decisions. And for those that have enjoyed Moneyball, there's a newer book that's out. I totally recommend reading it. It's Big Data Baseball, Math, Miracles, and the End of the 20-Year Losing Streak by Travis Salchik. It basically focuses on the 2013 Pirates and how they successfully applied sabermetrics to turn things around in Pittsburgh. So it's a good follow-up to Michael Lewis's work covering the A's a decade earlier.
It would probably be an understatement at this point to say that traditional baseball men have ranged in their reception to analytics from critical to bitter consternation. because analytics challenged that entire approach to the game. And we can see the transition, the changing of the guard in clearly the front offices. Traditionally, general managers came out of the ranks of the MLB players and the field managers. But now, we're seeing data-driven baseball introducing this new generation of general managers who never played in the majors, never managed in the majors. There are individuals like Mark Shapiro, who started with, I guess, the Cleveland Indians, Theo Epstein, who started with the Red Sox in a general manager position. Josh Burns started with the Arizona Diamondbacks. All of these are highly educated young men. Shapiro went to Princeton, Epstein to Yale, Burns went to Haverford College. Shapiro and Burns also starred for their college baseball teams. I can tell you that because I was a coach on the Haverford baseball team that Josh starred for. All three also had experience in baseball operations with other clubs. So while none of them played or managed in the MLB, each one has been successful in building a winner. Is it fair to say that playing and managing in the majors is not a necessary credential to be a successful general manager?
Yes, I completely agree as far as it not being a necessary credential. For instance, the Rays GM, Eric Neander, he actually started here as a video scout after he graduated from Virginia Tech. Then, moved on, took an intern job in Tampa in 2007, and worked his way to the top. Front offices they're looking to fill positions with, what's called smart baseball people. Even, here in this office, almost everyone has played like amateur baseball at some period of their life. And what ends up happening is injuries hit. You hit a talent level that exceeds your ability. But regardless, smart front offices, they're finding great value in not discriminating against smart baseball people who didn't make it to the show. It's still immensely valuable to have that actual MLB on the field experience, but it's widely deemed to no longer be a mandatory requirement.
Well, as you know, the Phillies have Matt Klentak as a general manager, relatively new, who has the same background as the other three individuals I mentioned. He graduated from Dartmouth, where he also played baseball. He began his major league career in baseball operations, first with the Rockies and later the Orioles. But Philly fans remain skeptical about him, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the two World Series championship teams we've had in Philly were built by traditional baseball folks who came from the playing, coaching, and managerial ranks. Klentak has also made many innovations that raise some questions among the fan base. The former regime under Ruben Amaro, and Ruben clearly was of the old school. He was mentored by Paul Owens and Ed Wade and Dallas Green, all those traditional baseball people. And under Ruben, the Phillies did create a baseball research and development department in Ruben's last years. Klentak has increased the analytics staff and brought on an advanced scout analyst and a mental skills coach. How necessary are those positions to improve player performance, Rob?
Well, having an R&D department is pretty much a necessity in the current environment. But I doubt that every organization needs to have every possible type of position staffed. And so much as the key is in addressing the various individual responsibilities and the goals that are set up by each unique front office. Regarding mental skills coaches, I think of it as like the sound mind, sound body concept. The regions of the brain that are responsible for motor execution, specifically the prefrontal cortex, they can be conditioned to increase motor skills. When these techniques are trained and they're executed correctly, studies have shown a subsequent gain in motor performance, which in baseball typically equates into a player performing at a higher level. Virtual reality technology has really been helping push this forward, not just in baseball, but NFL quarterbacks specifically. It's pretty much a trend that's been going on for several years. Regarding advanced scouting analysts, they can end up uncovering tendencies of upcoming opponent players and get that into the hands and basically make sure that the coaches are prepared for the upcoming series. Where a traditional scout tends to rely on his eyes and a stopwatch, the analyst, he's focusing more on, how his or other teams have previously approached a player of a situation, and what's been the resultant successes and failures. For instance, one of the product lines we make for advanced scouting departments is in stolen base analytics, such as, catcher pop times, pitcher pickoff times, pitcher delivery times, stolen base attempts and success probabilities, broken out by batter and pitcher-catcher combos, and applying them for future series matchups so that, they can always look, a few series ahead, and start to make game plans for, when to rest a guy and such. So, there's some additional value that comes in there beyond, what had previously been looked at in the traditional model.
Mm-hmm. I think probably the greater concern right now in Philadelphia is the new manager. And to his credit, he has won a lot of people over. He had a rocky start. The team's winning now. They're doing very well under him. They definitely have the talent. But still, his approach, and specifically with analytics, has a lot of people concerned. Now, obviously, we have a Joe Madden out there, but Madden's an exceptional guy. He's a hybrid. He came up through the old school. He has a lot of coaching experience. He's a bench coach for the Angels. He was the manager of Tampa Bay, and he worked his way into analytics from there. But now we're seeing guys who have little to no experience managing at any level of baseball, professional baseball, like Aaron Boone is the Yankees manager. And here we have Kapler, he had a 12-year major league career, and he served as an understudy to Josh Burns, who's now vice president of baseball operations for the Dodgers. But the concern, again, revolves around the fact that he only managed 1 year in the low minors, and that he does place greater emphasis on analytics than baseball instinct. I already talked about his move on opening day of pulling Nola, who had a 5-0 lead in the fifth inning, and he was crucified on Sports Talk Radio for doing that. And yet, if you look at Nola's history from 2017, opposing hitters posted an 836 OPS against him the third time through the batting order, compared with 642 and 548 the first two times. So why not give the game to the bullpen? Phillies win that game, Kapler would be applauded instead. So is this just a matter of the fans and the press catching up with the new generation of analytics-driven baseball, or is there justification to the criticism that Kapler has forfeited his baseball instincts?
Well, I think in this case, ignoring the fact that hindsight's 2020, Kapler made the right decision. Phillies' win expectancy was over 90% when Kapler lifted Nola. Win expectancy is essentially exactly what it sounds like, based on the variables of where you are in a game and, the outs, the innings, the base runner situations over the course of the past years. How often, has a team under this situation at this point in the game, how often have they won or how often have they lost? So history has shown that in this particular scenario, 90% of the time an MLB team has gone on to win the game. Kapler lifts Nola. He has a harder time getting through the batting order a third time than he does the first two. Absolutely. But the bullpen did not live up to expectations that day.
Right.
The actual Ty Turner wasn't until the eighth inning with the pass ball and the subsequent throwing error by Andrew Knapp. The Phils' win expectancy promptly fell to 55% after that play. It has slowly eroded from the 90, but it was still very, very high, very favorable. That sequence dropped it to practically a 50-50 game. And obviously Markakis' homer in the ninth finished out the Phillies' collapse that day. In my opinion, though, Kapler is playing the long game. In other words, he's saving Nola's arm from unnecessary fatigue during a relatively chilly early April game after the players have just come back from spending a month in Florida. I do the spring training route every year, whatever. It gets cold when you come back. You get pretty comfortable in the nice 80, 90-degree weather, depending on whether you're in, cactus or grapefruit. But it's tough, especially pitchers. It's really difficult to make those adjustments. But I believe if it had been a 1-0 game, however, Kapler would have kept him in a little longer. But he's not going to pull a Dusty Baker, just leave the starting pitcher in there for 120-some pitches, risk injury to a key member of the rotation, just as the team is getting out of the starting gate for the season. And especially from a sabermetric standpoint, Kapler totally made the right decision. From a Phillies fan standpoint, it's always tough to lose there, but was the collapse really directly attributed to Nola being lifted, a few batters in the sixth inning? Yeah, I'm not sold on that under those conditions now.
The thing that intrigues me about analytics, I think it has the potential to create accountability in baseball, something that has been missing for a long time. For example, we know that Nick Williams was not getting regular playing time because his statistics didn't merit that playing time against some of the pitchers that the Phillies were facing. And his remark about this was, I guess the computer's making the lineup out tonight, which was a real snarky remark. But what I love about that is that the numbers don't lie. That if he is not performing, then he doesn't deserve the playing time. Am I right in that assumption that analytics are going to create a greater sense of accountability in Major League Baseball?
Oh, I definitely say that that's already true. Especially even just diving into the split stats, the situational stats. Some guys come through at particular times, some guys don't. Circle back to the Aaron Judge Altuve discussion earlier. You have to come up with what that role is. There's guys who struggle temporarily, but they're your go-to players. You got to count on them and keep them in the lineup to be your anchors. But otherwise you have to be able to, do the matchup right. There's a reason why, there's not just 9 fielders, on the roster there or whatever, including the pitcher. That's why you have the ability to, structure platoon environments and other situations to be able to, maximize your run creation capability. Ultimately be able to convert that into additional wins. It's a long haul. It's a marathon. You got 162 games, and using the players the correct way. And it almost comes down to like a military equation. You have to commit divisions and groups, in a strategic manner, keep reserves available, and ultimately make sure that you don't just win the battles, but you win the war.
Yeah, I among many Phillies fans are I think, very interested in seeing how this is going to play out because, as you know, the Phillies as an organization always operate at extremes. At one time, it was no analytics, and it was all traditional baseball. Now it seems like it's all analytics. But, you know, early signs and indications say this is working. So it'll be interesting to find out. There's still a lot of people that need to be won over, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't one of them. This is a fascinating discussion, by the way. I really do appreciate it. I'm learning an awful lot here, and I know I'm well over my time, but I do have one more question that I know is very important to most of my listeners, and that question deals with the impact of analytics in selecting Hall of Fame candidates. When sabermetrics made their debut, many of the old school baseball writers believed that they would tarnish the candidacies of many deserving star players by revealing that their traditional stats were not as impressive when viewed in a larger analytical context. But I'm seeing just the opposite. And Dick Allen is a great example. Between 1983 and 1997, the baseball writers never gave Allen more than 18.9% of the vote. The next time he was eligible was in 2014 when the Veterans Committee considered his candidacy and he fell one vote short of being elected. Now remember, Allen's career totals are extremely deserving of baseball immortality, and Bill James would tell us that his is a character issue, that he, in James's word, blew apart every single team he played on using race as a manipulation. I clearly disagree with that, but everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I'm sure that's part of the reason he's not in the Hall of Fame. However, traditional stats say he's extremely deserving of baseball immortality. They include a career batting average of .292, 351 home runs, over 1,000 RBIs. He won 2 major awards, Rookie of the Year and MVP. He appeared in 7 All-Star games, won 2 home run titles, and an RBI title. And now the new metrics only make his case stronger. They reveal that Allen posted a 156 OPS plus, which ranks him 20th of all time, and a 69.9 offensive WAR, ranking him 61st of all time. Do you think that Allen and other deserving stars will finally get the boost they need for election to the Hall with analytics, or is this going to be a process, meaning that the guys on the Veterans Committee don't even know what analytics is, or most of them don't, so they're not going to pay attention to it. So these guys whose candidacies are thrown into the Veterans Committee don't have as great a chance, but the new baseball writers coming in will probably give more consideration to them. I guess what I'm asking for is, yeah, is Dick Allen going to get in, but what is the influence going to be on Hall of Fame candidates? What is the influence of analytics going to be on their candidacies?
Sure. I think it makes a definite boost in opportunity. In fact, I think it gives a fresh perspective on undervalued players of yesteryear. I'll talk about Allen first, and we'll kind of segue over to the overall concepts. Based purely on offensive prowess, I would vote for Dick Allen. But there's more to it than just that. His defense was pretty bad. In fact, as soon as the DH became an option, he became a DH, a designated hitter. His defensive WAR was actually a negative number. It was actually -10. So his offensive WAR outstanding. His overall WAR not quite as outstanding, down at like 60 for an overall number, which hurts him a bit. That in and of itself, I don't think is enough to dissuade voters. It's the controversial image aspect. In fact, he's been compared to the Albert Bell of his day, who was a great hitter, but no one's going to put Albert Bell into Cooperstown, most likely. And you touched upon, Bill James' opinion. He actually, pretty much just called Allen a clubhouse cancer. At one point in one of his books, he said that Allen did more to keep his teams from winning than anyone else who ever played Major League Baseball. That's a pretty strong commentary. And his 2001 baseball abstract, he actually called Allen the second most controversial player in baseball history behind Rogers Hornsby. So that's not necessarily, a very good place to stand, from a moral standpoint. But and I think that ultimately hurts Allen more than anything else. If you're just going to take a look at pure on the field, you got to put Rose in, and obviously that's kind of the litmus test for, opinion, in this case, banned. But, regardless, it also hurts Dave Parker. Dave Parker probably should have made it in. But there's, questions as well, with him off the field. And it's unfortunate. One guy who I think sabermetrics is going to really, really help is David Cohn. In fact, there's been a lot of talk about that. Sabermetrics, it makes Cohn look pretty darn good. Far better than, what has typically been, looked at in typical Hall of Fame candidates. He didn't get 200 career wins. It was 194 and 126. But plenty of guys have made it in, not hitting that 200 threshold. But he brought a lot of other intangibles. Did well with WAR and things such as that. So, the bottom line overall is I think it changes how, the voters are going to look at this. You're right. The journalists, the baseball writers of America, they embrace this and use that as an evaluative standard, that's going to change in some of the voting percentages that you'll see. But yeah, the Veterans Committee, which is, essentially going to be, a lot of the old school players, who are still alive, who are in the hall there. They may not necessarily be looking at this, with quite as an open impression as some of these analysts and journalists may look at it. But I'd say it's a movement that's going to end up continuing to take hold and to grow, with some positive arguments to get some players in. Howard Baines comes to mind as well, as guys who, some kind of new ways of slicing and dicing the numbers show insight that just really, was not, verifiable in the past.
I'm really curious because the book I'm working on right now is about Rocky Colavito, and Rocky had a very good major league career. I mean, he played, for over a decade, but for a decade's time, this is a guy who was routinely hit 25 home runs and, 100 or more RBIs. Never won a major award, unfortunately. Played for Cleveland when they weren't very good. Played for Detroit, who was better, but, again, never played on a World Series team. And this is a guy who was always in conversation for MVP, but never got it. I haven't done it.
Yeah, I was going to say that 61 season, man, those are some nice numbers.
Well, if you look at the 61 season when he was with Detroit, he and Norm Cash combined for more home runs and more RBIs than did Mantle and Maris, who were slugging it out to break Ruth's single-season home run record. And not many people were aware of that. And I really feel this guy's been overlooked, and it's just a shame because his stats, and again, I haven't done the metrics on it, but I will, and hopefully he'll get his due. But I really am. I mean, there's other people that are deserving out there too, and I really am hoping that the metrics help these guys. Louis Tion, I think, would be a guy when you're talking about, the metric of leverage for pitchers. I mean, I think he would probably measure up magnificently. And here's a guy who just once again last year didn't make it. And he was a brilliant pitcher, for the Red Sox and the Indians before that. So, well, hey, listen, this was a wonderful discussion. It really educates me. It gives me a better appreciation too for the listeners. So, thanks for being with us, Robin, and for giving us some excellent insight into baseball analytics.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm more than happy to take some time and try to go over some of these concepts. We pretty much live this stuff day in, day out at the office, and it's always nice to kind of take a little time and try to go over it, explain it, put it in context. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, hey, thank you, Philly fans, as well, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia Baseball, Past, Present, Personal. This is Bill Kashatus rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.